The rain in the city did not wash things clean. It merely made the grime slicker, turning the asphalt into a black mirror that reflected the distorted neon signs of the skyscrapers above. For Arthur, the rain was not a weather event. It was an adversary. It was a cold, living thing that sought to find the gaps in his coat, the holes in his boots, and the cracks in his spirit. He sat huddled in the recessed doorway of what used to be a high-end jewelry store, now boarded up and covered in layers of peeling concert posters. The overhang provided exactly 3 feet of dry concrete. This was his kingdom for the night. Arthur pulled his coat tighter around his thin frame. It was a wool trench coat, once charcoal grey and tailored to fit him perfectly, bought on Savile Row in London a lifetime ago. Now it was stained with mud, frayed at the cuffs and smelled of damp cardboard and exhaust fumes, but it was still wool. It was the last remnant of the man he used to be. He watched the feet of the passers-by. That was how you experienced the world when you had fallen this far, from the knees down. He saw shiny leather Oxfords splashing through puddles, high-heeled boots hurrying toward waiting taxis, and sneakers skipping over the gutters. No one looked down. To look down was to acknowledge him, and to acknowledge him was to admit that the system, the great glittering machine of the city, could fail. It was easier for them to pretend he was part of the architecture, a pile of refuse left for the sanitation department. Arthur didn't mind anymore. In the beginning, the invisibility had hurt. It had burned like acid in his throat when former colleagues walked past him without a flicker of recognition. Now, 3 years later, the invisibility was a shield. It kept him safe. It kept him hidden from the shame. He once had everything, the wind seemed to whisper as it howled through the alleyway, rattling the loose metal of a fire escape. It wasn't just a poetic thought. It was a literal truth. 3 years ago, Arthur Vance had been sitting in a boardroom 50 stories above this very sidewalk. He had been the CEO of Vance & Sterling, a legacy investment firm built on integrity. He had accounts in Switzerland, a penthouse overlooking the park, and a name that opened doors in every capital city in Europe. He remembered the warmth of the mahogany table under his hands. He remembered the scratch of the Mont Blanc pen against the paper. And he remembered the smile of Marcus Sterling, his partner, his brother, in everything but blood. That smile had been the last thing Arthur saw before the floor fell out from under his life. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. The charges were swift, brutal, and entirely fabricated. Marcus had been planning it for a decade, moving assets, forging signatures, Arthur's signatures. By the time the regulators kicked down the doors, the accounts were empty, the evidence was damning, and Marcus was the grieving partner shocked by Arthur's betrayal. Arthur lost the company. Then the lawyers took the houses. The scandal took his reputation, and the despair took the rest. Now he had $3 in change, a half-empty bottle of water, and the Savile Row coat. A sudden gust of wind blew a spray of icy water under the overhang, stinging Arthur's face. He shivered, tucking his chin into his chest. He was trying to calculate if he had enough for a hot coffee at the all-night diner 3 blocks away, or if he needed to save it for morning. It was a delicate, economic balance. Just as he closed his eyes, trying to summon the memory of a fireplace, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of the city. It wasn't the roar of an engine or the honk of a horn. It was a sharp, jagged intake of breath, a sob. Arthur opened his eyes. Through the curtain of heavy rain he saw a silhouette standing near the curb, about 20 feet away. It was a woman. She was standing perfectly still, which was dangerous in this weather. The water was pouring over her, plastering her hair to her skull. She wasn't dressed for this. She wore a silver evening gown that shimmered under the streetlights, completely soaked, the hem dragging in the oily puddle water. She had one shoe on, a strappy, delicate high heel, and she was holding the other in her hand, the heel snapped clean off. She looked like a fallen angel, dropped from one of the penthouses above, shattered on the pavement. She was shivering so violently that Arthur could see the tremors from where he sat. She held a phone to her ear, tapping the screen frantically, but the screen remained black. Dead battery, or water damage. She pulled the phone away, looked at it with a mixture of disbelief and terror, and then let out that sound again, a low, broken whimper of pure helplessness. Arthur hesitated. The rule of the street was simple: don't get involved. Trouble travels fast, and a man with nothing has everything to lose. If he moved, someone else might take his dry spot. If he approached her, she might scream. A homeless man approaching a young woman in the dark was a recipe for police sirens and a beating. He should close his eyes. He should let the city eat her just like it had eaten him. But then she turned slightly. The light from a passing bus illuminated her face. She was young, perhaps early 20s, with wide, terrified eyes that darted around the empty street looking for a savior that wasn't coming. She looked at the towering buildings as if they were monsters. Arthur knew that look. He had worn it himself the first night he slept on a bench. It was the look of someone who had just realized that civilization is a thin veneer, and she had fallen through the cracks. He couldn't leave her. The man he was, the CEO, the shark, might have walked away. But the man he had become, the man stripped of ego and pride, could not. Arthur groaned as he shifted his weight, his stiff joints protesting. He stood up. He was tall, and despite his gaunt frame, he still held himself with a subconscious dignity. He picked up his flattened piece of cardboard and stepped out into the rain. "Miss?" he called out. His voice was raspy from disuse, gravelly and deep. The woman spun around, gasping. She stumbled back, nearly twisting her good ankle. She held her broken shoe up like a weapon. "Stay back," she cried. Her voice was high, cultured, but laced with panic. I don't have any cash. I don't have anything." Arthur stopped 10 feet away, raising his hands slowly, palms open. He stayed in the light of the street lamp so she could see him clearly. He knew what she saw. A beard grey with age and grime, sunken eyes, a dirty coat. A spectre. "I don't want your money," Arthur said, speaking slowly, enunciating his words with the crisp, educated accent that always surprised people. It was the accent of boardrooms and universities, not the gutter. "You're freezing. You cannot stand out here. Hypothermia sets in faster than you think, especially in wet silk." She blinked, confused by his tone, by the authority in his voice. She lowered the shoe slightly, shivering so hard her teeth chattered audibly. I need a taxi. My phone, it died. I don't know where I am." "You're in the financial district," Arthur said gently, "but there are no taxis at this hour in this rain, not on this side of town. The drivers don't like the dead-end streets." He gestured behind him to his small, dry alcove. "I have a shelter. It is not much, but it is dry, and it is out of the wind." She looked at the dark, recessed doorway, then back at him. The fear spiked in her eyes. It was a terrifying choice. The freezing rain that was currently numbing her limbs, or the dark corner with a strange, homeless man. Arthur saw the hesitation. He smiled, a sad crinkling of the eyes. "I promise you, I am harmless. I am just an old man trying to keep dry. But if you stay out here another 10 minutes, you will pass out. Please, come out of the rain." Maybe it was the cold that forced her hand, or maybe it was something in Arthur's eyes, a clarity that didn't fit his appearance. She nodded, a jerky, hesitant motion. She limped toward him, clutching her arms around her chest. Arthur stepped aside, playing the role of the doorman he once tipped, ushering her into the small dry space of the storefront entrance. It was cramped, smelling of old stone and damp wool, but the relief was instant. The wind was cut off. The rain became a curtain in front of them, rather than a hammer beating down on them. Arthur took his cardboard mat and laid it out on the driest patch of concrete. "Sit," he instructed. "Concrete steals heat from the body. You need insulation." She hesitated, looking at the dirty cardboard, then at her silver dress. Then, realizing the absurdity of her vanity in this situation, she collapsed onto the cardboard, her legs giving out. She curled into a ball, shaking violently. "I'm so cold," she stammered. Arthur didn't hesitate. He began to unbutton his trench coat. "What are you doing?" she asked, eyes widening in alarm. "I have layers underneath," Arthur lied. He had a thin, hole-ridden sweater and a cotton shirt that was more thread than fabric. "This coat is heavy wool. It will trap your body heat." He took the coat off. The cold air hit him like a physical blow, punching the breath out of his lungs, but he didn't show it. He draped the heavy, damp-smelling coat over her shoulders. She pulled it around herself instantly, burying her face in the collar. It smelled of the street, yes, but it was warm and it was heavy. It felt like safety. Arthur sat down on the concrete a few feet away from her, maintaining a respectful distance, hugging his knees to his chest to conserve his own warmth. For a long time, there was only the sound of the rain and her slowing breathing. The shivers began to subside as the wool did its work. Arthur stared out at the street, giving her privacy, letting her regain her composure. He watched the water rush into the storm drain, swirling black and angry. Why? The voice was small, muffled by the coat. Arthur turned his head. She was looking at him, her mascara running down her cheeks, her hair a wet tangle. But her eyes were clear now, studying him with intense curiosity. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "I told you I didn't have money." Arthur shrugged, a small movement of his thin shoulders. "Because you were crying, and because it is raining." "That's not a reason," she said. "Most people would have walked by. People did walk by earlier. A car drove right through a puddle and splashed me. They saw me, and they didn't care." "The city makes people blind," Arthur said softly. "It teaches them to look straight ahead. If they look at pain, they might feel obligated to fix it, and everyone is too busy to fix anything." He paused, rubbing his hands together to generate friction. "I suppose. When you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear. Helping you cost me nothing but a little warmth, and warmth is meant to be shared." She stared at him, stunned. This man, who looked like a derelict, spoke like a poet. She noticed his hands then. They were weathered, scarred by the cold, and the nails were rough, but they were not the hands of an addict. They were steady. And the way he sat, spine straight, legs crossed at the ankles, it mimicked a pose one might see in a private club, not a sidewalk. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked, probing gently. "I mean, you haven't always been—" She gestured vaguely at the street. Arthur let out a dry chuckle. "We are all from somewhere, miss. I have been a resident of the pavement for 3 winters now. Before that," he trailed off, looking at the boarded-up window of the jewelry store behind them. He could almost see his reflection in the dark glass, superimposed over the memory of the man in the Italian suit. "Before that, I was a man who thought he owned the world. I thought I understood how it worked. I thought that if you followed the rules, if you worked hard, if you trusted your friends, you were safe." "What happened?" she whispered. The rain seemed to quiet down, as if the city itself wanted to hear the answer. "I trusted the wrong friend," Arthur said simply. The pain of it was still a sharp shard of glass in his chest, even after all this time. "I didn't watch the shadows. I was too busy looking at the light, and by the time I looked down, everything was gone. My home, my name, my life." He turned to her, his eyes intense and grey. "One signature. That is all it takes to end a life. One pen stroke on the wrong piece of paper." The young woman shifted under the coat. She looked down at her own hands. "I know about signatures," she murmured bitterly. "I know about people pretending to be something they aren't." Arthur looked at her with renewed interest. She wasn't just a party girl who got lost. There was a hardness in her jaw, a fire in her eyes that spoke of a struggle. "Is that why you are here? Running from a signature?" She let out a harsh laugh. "Running from a boardroom, running from a destiny I didn't ask for." She pulled the coat tighter. "My father died 6 months ago. He left me everything. Or at least I thought it was everything. I'm supposed to take over the family legacy, but the more I dig, the more I realize that the legacy is rot." She looked at Arthur, her eyes searching his face. "I found things. Tonight. Files that were supposed to be deleted. I confronted the board of directors at the gala. I told them I knew what they were doing. I told them I was going to the authorities." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "That was brave," he said gravely, "and dangerous." "They laughed at me," she said, tears welling up again. "My uncle, he told me I was a silly little girl who didn't understand complex finance. He told me to go home and shop, and let the men handle the business. He took my phone, said he needed to clean it of sensitive data. I grabbed it back and ran. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to get away from their smiles. Their shark smiles." Arthur nodded slowly. "Shark smiles," he repeated. "I know them well. They smile while they bleed you dry." A moment of silence passed between them, a bridge built of shared trauma. 2 people from opposite ends of the economic spectrum, bonded by the cruelty of the corporate machine. "I'm Arthur," he said, extending a hand. It was a gesture of equality. He wasn't begging. He was introducing himself. She looked at his hand, then reached out from under the coat and took it. Her hand was small and warm. His was large and freezing. "I'm Elena," she said. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Elena," Arthur said, bowing his head slightly, "though I wish the circumstances were more hospitable. If I had my old office, I would offer you an espresso and a view of the harbor." "I like this view," Elena said, looking at him, "not the street. It's honest. They sat for another hour as the rain turned from a torrent to a drizzle. They talked about small things. Music, the best places to find pizza in the city, the books Arthur used to read. She discovered that he could quote Shakespeare and understand market derivatives. He discovered that she was not a vapid heiress, but a Wharton graduate with a sharp mind for forensic accounting and a heart that was breaking under the weight of her corrupt inheritance. Arthur felt a spark of life returning to his chest. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't just surviving. He was conversing. He was being seen as a human being. It was intoxicating. He forgot the cold. He forgot the hunger gnawing at his stomach. Then, the spell was broken. A pair of headlights swept across the wet pavement, blindingly bright. A sleek, black-armored SUV crawled down the street, slowing down at every intersection. It looked like a predator prowling the ocean floor. Elena stiffened. She shrank back into the shadows of the doorway. "Oh no," she whispered. "They found me." "Who?" Arthur asked, his muscles tensing. "Security," she hissed. "My uncle's private security. They aren't the police, Arthur. They fix problems." The SUV stopped right in front of their alley. The window rolled down. A man in a dark suit leaned out, scanning the sidewalk. He spotted the silver fabric of the dress peeking out from under Arthur's dirty coat. The door opened. 2 men stepped out. They were large, professional, and radiated menace. They opened umbrellas, not caring about the rain, moving with purposeful strides toward the homeless man and the girl. "Miss?" one of the men called out. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Your uncle is very worried about you. You have everyone in a panic." Elena stood up, the coat sliding off her shoulders. She looked small and vulnerable again without it. "I'm not going back there," she said, though her voice shook. "I'm not going back to him." "Now, miss, don't be difficult," the man said, stepping onto the curb. He looked at Arthur with pure disgust. "And get away from the vagrant. You don't know what kind of diseases these people carry." Arthur stood up. He placed himself between the men and Elena. It was a ridiculous gesture. He was malnourished and unarmed against 2 professional bodyguards, but the instinct to protect was overwhelming. "The lady said she does not wish to go," Arthur said, his voice dropping to its deepest register. "I suggest you leave her alone." The security guard laughed. It was a cold, barking sound. "Look at this. The hobo thinks he's a hero. Move aside, trash, before I break your legs." "Arthur, don't," Elena said, grabbing his arm. "They'll hurt you. I have to handle this." She stepped forward, trying to regain her dignity. She wiped the rain from her face and stood tall, channeling the authority she was born into. "I will come with you," Elena said to the guards, "but only to get my things, and then I am leaving." "Whatever you say, miss," the guard said, reaching out to grab her arm firmly. "Let go of me," she snapped. "I'm capable of walking." She turned back to Arthur. Her eyes were filled with tears and gratitude. She reached into her hidden pocket of the dress, realizing she still had nothing to give him. No money, nothing. "Wait," the guard said, looking at his phone. "We need to confirm pickup. Is this the target?" He looked at Elena. "State your full name for the record, please, miss. The boss wants voice confirmation." Elena sighed, a sound of defeat. She looked at Arthur as if apologizing for the world she was about to be dragged back into. She faced the guard. "Eleanor," she said clearly. "Eleanor Sterling." The world stopped spinning. Arthur froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him paler than the deathly grey of the street. The sound of the rain faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Sterling. He looked at her, really looked at her. He searched the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. He saw it now. The resemblance he had missed in the dark and the rain. She had Marcus's eyes. She was the daughter of Marcus Sterling, the daughter of the man who had stolen his life, the daughter of the devil himself. "Sterling," Arthur whispered, the word escaping his lips like a curse. Elena looked back at him, confused by his reaction. "Yes. Why?" But Arthur couldn't speak. He was paralyzed by the revelation. The girl he had just saved, the girl he had covered with his coat and comforted with his soul, was the heiress to the fortune that was rightfully his. She was the princess of the empire built on his bones. The guard shoved Arthur aside, sending him stumbling into the wet brick wall. "Out of the way, bum!" They hustled Eleanor toward the car. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes locking onto Arthur's shocked face. "Arthur!" she called out as they pushed her into the back seat. "Thank you. I won't forget you." The heavy door slammed shut. The engine roared. The black SUV peeled away, splashing dirty water onto Arthur's legs, leaving him alone in the cold once more. Arthur stood there, trembling. Not from the cold this time, but from a rage that had been dormant for 3 years. A fire had been lit in the rain. He looked at the empty space where she had sat. She was trying to expose them. She hated the corruption. She didn't know. Arthur looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He wasn't just a forgotten man anymore. He was a man with a connection. He knew who she was. And if she was truly trying to find the truth, she was the key. He picked up his coat from where it had fallen. It was still warm from her body. He put it on, buttoning it all the way to the top. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, hard determination. He wasn't going to sleep tonight. He had work to do. The morning sun did not bring warmth, it only brought visibility, which for Arthur was far more dangerous. He had not slept. The adrenaline that had surged through him when Elena pronounced her surname had kept him awake through the darkest hours, his mind racing like an engine that hadn't been turned over in years. He sat on a park bench, 3 blocks from the gleaming glass monolith that was the Sterling Tower, formerly the Vance and Sterling Tower. He watched the building rise into the grey sky, a needle of steel and arrogance piercing the clouds. It was his creation. He knew every bolt, every stress fracture in the foundation, every secret exit. And now he knew the girl inside was drowning in the same poisonous waters that had swallowed him. Arthur looked down at himself. He had done his best to tidy up in a public restroom. He had washed the grime from his face with cold water and rough paper towels. He had combed his beard with his fingers. He had tried to brush the mud from the hem of the Savile Row coat. He still looked homeless, but he no longer looked defeated. There was a sharpness in his grey eyes that had been missing for 3 years. He had a mission. He needed to talk to her, but he couldn't just walk through the front doors. The security guards, muscle-bound men in ill-fitting suits, likely the same breed as the ones who took Elena, would tackle him before he reached the revolving doors. He needed to be smarter. He needed to use the knowledge of the CEO he once was. He knew that the junior executives, the ones with a conscience and high stress levels, usually took their coffee breaks at 10 a.m. at the small artisanal roastery on the corner of 5th and Main. He also knew that Eleanor, if she was truly trying to investigate the company, wouldn't be sitting in the ivory tower all day. She would be restless. She would be looking for air. Arthur waited. He spent his last $3 on a black coffee and sat at an outdoor metal table, shivering slightly in the morning chill, trying to look like an eccentric artist rather than a vagrant. At 10:15 a.m. she appeared. Elena emerged from the side entrance of the tower, the one reserved for low-profile exits. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a long beige coat that looked brand new, likely bought by an assistant that morning to replace the ruined silver dress. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were hunched, her head down, clutching a tablet against her chest like a shield. She didn't have security with her. She had likely slipped away, needing a moment of peace. She walked toward the park, towards the very bench where Arthur had spent the night planning. She sat down on the far end, placing the tablet on her lap, staring blankly at the pigeons pecking at crumbs on the pavement. She looked incredibly lonely. Arthur stood up. He left his coffee on the table and walked over. He didn't approach her from behind. He didn't want to startle her. He walked in a wide arc, coming into her field of vision slowly. "The morning light is less forgiving than the rain," Arthur said softly. Eleanor jumped, her hands tightening around the tablet. She looked up, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. When she recognized him, the fear in her face melted into a look of genuine relief, followed by a flush of embarrassment. "Arthur," she breathed. She looked around nervously to see if anyone was watching. I didn't think I'd see you again. I felt terrible about last night. They just took me." "Men like that are paid to be efficient, not polite," Arthur said, taking a step closer but not sitting down. "Are you all right, Elena? Did they hurt you?" "No," she shook her head. "Just a lecture. A long, loud lecture from my uncle about responsibility and mental stability. He thinks I'm having a breakdown because I'm asking questions about the accounts." She laughed bitterly. "Maybe I am crazy. Maybe everyone is right and I should just take the allowance and shut up." "You are not crazy," Arthur said firmly. "The instinct to seek the truth is a sign of sanity, not madness, especially in that building." He nodded toward the tower. Elena sighed, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "I don't know what to do. I have all these files, these archives from my father's era, but I can't make sense of them. It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. There are transactions that go nowhere, companies that exist on paper but have no offices, and names that have been redacted. Arthur felt his heart hammer against his ribs. This was it. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench next to her. "Please." She moved her coat. Arthur sat. He was close enough to smell her perfume, expensive, floral, crashing against the smell of the street that clung to him. "You mentioned missing pieces," he said carefully. "Sometimes, to see the picture, you have to know who painted it." Eleanor looked at him, intrigued. "You sound like you know something about business, Arthur. Last night, you mentioned a partner, a betrayal." "I did," Arthur said. He looked at the tablet in her lap. "Eleanor, I need you to do something for me. It will sound strange, it will sound impossible, but you trusted me in the rain last night. I am asking you to trust me in the light of day." "What is it?" she asked, sensing the shift in his tone. He wasn't speaking like a kindly old man anymore. He was speaking with command. "Open your archives," Arthur said. "Access the personnel files from 3 years ago, the executive board records, specifically the minutes from the meeting on October 14th, 3 years ago." Elena frowned. "October 14th. That's the day the scandal broke. The day the previous CEO was arrested. My father took over fully the next day." "Look it up," Arthur urged. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then, driven by curiosity, she unlocked the tablet. She navigated through the secure folders she had likely hacked or stolen access to. She found the date. She opened the file. "It says here, emergency board meeting regarding the resignation of the CEO due to gross misconduct," she read aloud. "The CEO, it just says the partner. The name is blacked out in the summary." "Go to the signature page," Arthur said. His voice was a low rumble. "The resignation letter, it is a legal document. They couldn't redact the original signature on the scan." Elena swiped to the bottom of the document. She zoomed in. "There is a signature," she whispered. "It's shaky, like the person was forced to sign it." She squinted at the script. Arthur, V..." She stopped. She froze. She slowly lifted her head. She looked at the homeless man sitting next to her. She looked at his grey beard, his tired eyes, the high cheekbones that were now gaunt but still defined. Then she looked back at the signature, Arthur Vance. "Arthur," she whispered. "Your name is Arthur." "My name is Arthur Vance," he said. The wind blew through the park, rustling the dead leaves at their feet. "I founded that company with your father, Marcus Sterling, 20 years ago. I built that tower. I hired the people who now look at me as if I am garbage. And on October 14th, 3 years ago, your father placed a pen in my hand and told me that if I didn't sign that confession, he would frame my son for drug trafficking." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You have a son?" "I had a son," Arthur said, his voice cracking for the first time. "He died of an overdose 6 months after I lost everything. The stress, the shame, it broke him. Marcus knew I would sign anything to save him. So I signed. I took the fall for Marcus's embezzlement. I lost the fortune, I lost the reputation, and then I lost my boy anyway." Tears streamed down Elena's face. She looked at the tablet, then at the building, then at Arthur. The horror of it was washing over her. The monster wasn't in the shadows, the monster was her legacy. "My father, he did this? He did this to you?" "He did," Arthur said. "And now your uncle is continuing the cycle. They are using the same accounts, Elena. The ghost accounts I found right before they destroyed me. That is what you are seeing in the files. That is why the math doesn't add up." Elena shook her head in disbelief. I thought they were just greedy. I didn't know they were evil." She looked at Arthur with a new intensity. "You were the genius behind Vance and Sterling. Everyone knows the legend. They say Vance was the brain, Sterling was the face. But the history books, they say you stole from the pension funds. They say you were a criminal. History is written by the winners," Arthur said bitterly. "And I lost." Elena looked down at the tablet again. Her fingers flew across the screen. If you are him, if you are really him, then you know the passwords, you know where the bodies are buried." "I know the structure," Arthur corrected, "but they would have changed the codes." "Not the deeper ones," Eleanor said, her eyes widening. "My uncle is lazy. He relies on the IT department, and they are lazy too. There's a legacy server. The vault. It's an offline backup system for catastrophic data recovery. My father told me about it once when he was drunk. He said, "Elena, if the world ends, the vault still remembers who owes us money." Arthur's eyes lit up. The vault? I built that system. It was designed to be immutable, read-only. If they uploaded the original fraudulent transfers there to back them up, they can't delete them without a physical key. A key? Eleanor asked. A physical drive, Arthur explained. 2 keys, actually. I had one. Marcus had one. Mine was taken when they seized my assets. It's likely in the evidence locker at the firm, or in your uncle's private safe. Elena grabbed his hand. We can get it. Arthur pulled back slightly. Elena, look at me. I am a ghost. If I walk into that building, they will call the police. Or worse, your uncle's private security will take me to an alley and finish what the rain started. You don't have to walk in as Arthur the homeless man, Eleanor said, a fierce determination igniting in her eyes. She stood up. You are Arthur Vance. You own half that building by blood and sweat. We are going to get you back in. But first, we need to change the narrative. How? My credit cards are monitored, she said, thinking fast. But I have cash. I have a stash in my apartment that my uncle doesn't know about. Emergency fund. She looked him up and down. We are going to get you a suit, a haircut, and a shave. If we are going to fight monsters, Arthur, you need to look like a knight. Arthur felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was hope. It was dangerous, terrifying hope. Elena, if we do this, if we expose them, you will lose everything. The Sterling name will be mud. Your inheritance will be gone. Elena looked at the tower one last time. I don't want blood money, Arthur. I want my soul back, and I want to give you yours. She extended her hand to him again, just like she had in the rain. But this time, she wasn't asking for help. She was offering an alliance. Partner? She asked. Arthur stood up. He straightened his spine. He took her hand. His grip was strong. Partner, he said. The transformation took 3 hours. They went to a small, discreet barber shop in a part of the city where questions weren't asked. The barber, an old Italian man, shaved off the grey matted beard, revealing the strong, square jawline that had once graced the cover of Forbes. He cut the wild, grey hair into a sharp, dignified style. When Arthur looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself. The man staring back was older than the one he remembered, yes. The lines around the eyes were deeper, etched by sorrow and exposure. But the eyes themselves, they were clear. The vagrant was gone. Arthur Vance had returned. Next, they went to a vintage clothing store. They couldn't afford Savile Row, not yet. But Arthur knew how to fit a suit. He found a charcoal grey wool suit that was slightly out of date but classic in its cut, a crisp white shirt, a dark tie. He polished his old boots until the leather shone. When he stepped out of the changing room, Elena put a hand over her mouth. My God, she whispered, you look powerful. Arthur adjusted his cuffs. It felt like putting on armor. Clothes do not make the man, he said, quoting an old adage, but they certainly help him get past the front desk. We're not going to the front desk, Elena said, checking her watch. It's 2 p.m. My uncle has his weekly massage and therapy session. He leaves the office for 2 hours. The executive floor is practically empty, except for his assistant, Mrs. Higgins. Arthur smiled. Mrs. Higgins. Is she still there? She used to keep peppermint candies in her top drawer. She hates my uncle, Elena confided. She's been trying to retire for 5 years, but he won't release her pension fully. She's trapped. Then we have an ally, Arthur said. They walked back toward the financial district. The city felt different now. Arthur wasn't watching feet anymore. He was looking people in the eye, and they looked back. They moved out of his way. He walked with the stride of a man who owned the pavement. They reached the rear service entrance of the Sterling Tower. Eleanor swiped her key card. The light turned green. Ready? She asked, her hand trembling slightly on the handle. Arthur took a deep breath. He was about to step back into the belly of the beast. He was about to risk his freedom, his safety, and perhaps his life. I have nothing left to lose, Arthur said, and everything to gain. After you, Miss Sterling. They slipped inside. The air conditioning hit Arthur's face, the smell of sanitized air, floor wax, and money. It was the smell of his past. They took the service elevator to the 50th floor. The numbers ticked up. 10, 20, 30. Arthur's heart pounded. The vault. If they could get the physical key from the safe, they could prove everything. They could prove the forgery. They could prove the theft. The doors opened with a soft chime. The hallway was plush, carpeted in deep navy. It was quiet. "This way," Elena whispered. They moved toward the CEO's office. The massive double doors were mahogany. Arthur reached out and touched the wood. He had chosen this wood. Suddenly, a voice rang out from down the hall. "Elena, is that you?" They froze. It wasn't the uncle. It was a sharp nasal voice, Mrs. Higgins. She was standing by her desk holding a stack of files. She peered over her spectacles. She looked at Eleanor, and then her gaze shifted to the tall, distinguished man standing next to her. She squinted. She dropped the files. Papers scattered across the floor. Mr. Vance," she stammered, her face going pale. "But you're dead. They said you died on the streets." Arthur stepped forward, raising a finger to his lips. "Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "And I believe you and I have some unfinished business regarding a pension fund." Mrs. Higgins looked at the door to the CEO's office, then back at Arthur. A slow conspiratorial smile spread across her face. "The safe combination," she whispered, "is your birthday, Mr. Vance. He never changed it. He said you were too stupid to ever come back." Arthur smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. He was wrong. The heavy mahogany doors of the CEO's office swung open with a hush of expensive hinges. Arthur stepped inside, and the air left his lungs. It was exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. The same Persian rug, deep red and intricate. The same floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline, a view of the kingdom he had built, now ruled by a usurper. The only difference was the desk. His minimalist glass desk was gone, replaced by a gaudy, heavy oak fortress that looked ridiculous in the modern space. On the wall, where Arthur had hung a simple abstract painting, there was now a massive portrait of Marcus Sterling, Elena's father, looking benevolent and wise. The lie was framed in gold. "He never changed the combination," Mrs. Higgins hissed from the doorway, her eyes darting toward the elevators down the hall. "But you have to hurry. Robert usually takes the private lift. If he comes back early, we will be quick," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. She rushed to the desk, but Arthur moved to the wall behind the portrait. "It's not in the desk," Arthur said, his voice void of emotion. "Marcus was paranoid. He wanted his secrets close to his heart." Arthur reached behind the heavy frame of Marcus's portrait. His fingers found the hidden latch he had installed 10 years prior, a failsafe he had designed for corporate espionage protection, never thinking it would be used against him. Click. The panel slid open, revealing a wall safe. Elena watched, mesmerized. "You really built this place." "I built the walls," Arthur muttered. "I just didn't see the termites living in them." He reached for the digital dial. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. If Mrs. Higgins was wrong, if Robert had changed the code, the alarm would trigger silently, and the building would go into lockdown. He punched in the numbers, 091268, his birthday. The light on the safe blinked red. Then, a long, agonizing second later, it turned green. The lock disengaged with a heavy thunk. Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside, sitting on a velvet shelf, was a single black external hard drive and a thick leather folder. The physical key and the original papers. Arthur grabbed the folder first. He opened it. His hands shook, not from age, but from rage. There on top was the resignation letter, the one he had supposedly signed. He held it up to the light. "Look," he whispered to Elena. She stepped closer. "It looks real." "Look at the pressure," Arthur said, pointing to the signature. "It's too even. A digital print, and here," he flipped to the next page, a transfer deed for his personal assets. The date. This was signed 2 days before the board meeting. They stole my house before they even fired me. "The drive," Elena urged. "We need the digital proof, the ghost accounts." Arthur grabbed the black drive. "We need to plug this into the main terminal. It has to handshake with the server to decrypt the files. If we take it out of the building without unlocking it, it wipes itself. Security protocol." "The computer," Eleanor pointed to the massive monitor on the oak desk. Arthur sat in the chair that should have been his. It felt wrong, tainted. He shook off the feeling and woke the computer. It prompted for a password. "I don't know Robert's password," Elena panicked. "I do." Mrs. Higgins's voice came from the door. She didn't step inside. She stood like a sentry. "Try Goldfinger, All caps. He thinks he's a Bond villain. Arthur typed it in. Access granted. Unbelievable, Arthur muttered. He plugged the drive into the port. A window popped up. Decryption sequence initiated. Estimated time 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Arthur said, staring at the progress bar. It moved with agonizing slowness. 1%, 2%. We don't have 4 minutes, Elena said, pacing the room. The massage place is only 2 blocks away. If he skipped the steam room— He never skips the steam room, Mrs. Higgins said, trying to sound confident, but her voice wavered. Arthur sat still, his eyes glued to the screen. He was watching his life being restored, byte by byte. The drive was pulling the hidden ledger from the vault server, matching the encryption keys and unlocking the history of the theft. 45%. The room was silent, except for the hum of the hard drive and the distant wail of a siren in the city below. Then the elevator chime dinged. It wasn't the service elevator. It was the private executive lift, the one that opened directly into the foyer outside the office. Mrs. Higgins turned pale. "He's here." "Stall him," Arthur commanded, his voice sharp. "Elena, stand behind me. Do not let him see the screen." "Arthur, we have to run," Elena whispered frantically. "Not without the data. If I pull the drive now, it corrupts. We lose everything." Arthur didn't move. He sat like a stone statue, 78%. They heard the heavy footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer. Then a booming, jovial voice. "Mrs. Higgins, why are you standing there looking like you've seen a ghost? I hope you have my afternoon scotch ready. The masseuse had hands like bricks today." Robert Sterling walked into the room. He was a large man, red-faced, wearing a suit that cost more than Arthur's first house. He was wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He walked right past Mrs. Higgins, intent on his desk. "And who is—" Robert started to say, seeing the back of the chair occupied. He stopped. He saw Elena standing by the window, looking terrified. "Elena, what the hell are you doing here? I thought security took you home." Then the chair swiveled. Arthur Vance faced him. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Robert Sterling dropped his handkerchief. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Hello, Robert," Arthur said. His voice was calm, the voice of a CEO addressing a junior subordinate. "You've redecorated? I hate it." "You," Robert choked out. He stumbled back, gripping the doorframe. "You're dead. You're a bum. I saw the reports. You were freezing to death in the gutters." "I was," Arthur admitted. "But it seems the gutter didn't want me, and neither did the grave." Robert's shock quickly morphed into panic, then into a crimson-faced rage. He looked at the computer screen. He saw the progress bar. 92%. "What are you doing?" Robert roared. He lunged forward. "Get away from my computer." Elena stepped in front of him. "Stop it, Uncle Robert. It's over." "Get out of my way, you stupid girl." Robert raised a hand to strike her. Arthur was out of the chair in a blur. The years on the street had taken his weight, but they had given him a different kind of strength, a desperate, wiry speed. He caught Robert's wrist in mid-air. He squeezed. Hard. Robert yelped, his knees buckling under the pressure. Arthur twisted the arm, forcing the larger man back. "You will not touch her," Arthur snarled, his face inches from Robert's. "You stole my money, you stole my name, but you will not touch my partner." "Security!" Robert screamed, his voice cracking. "Security! Intruder! Level 50!" The alarm blared, a high-pitched, deafening siren that filled the building. Red lights began to flash in the hallway. Beep. Arthur looked back at the screen. Download complete. Drive safe to remove. Arthur shoved Robert backward into the heavy oak desk. The man crashed into his own portraits, knocking over a crystal decanter of whiskey. Arthur snatched the drive from the computer. He grabbed the leather folder. "Time to go," Arthur said. "They'll lock the elevators," Mrs. Higgins shouted over the siren. "You can't go down." "The roof," Arthur said instantly. "The helipad access. The fire stairs don't lock from the inside on the executive floor." "Arthur, the guards will be coming up the stairs," Elena cried. "Then we will meet them," Arthur said. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. "Run. Go to the lobby. Act terrified. Tell them a madman broke in. Save yourself." "Give 'em hell, Arthur," Mrs. Higgins said, and she kicked off her heels and ran toward the service exit. Arthur grabbed Elena's hand. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then run." They burst out of the office, past the sprawling Robert Sterling, who was fumbling for the phone on his desk. They sprinted down the hallway toward the emergency stairwell marked roof access. Arthur hit the crash bar. The door flew open. The cold wind from the roof stairwell hit them. They ran up, not down. "Why are we going up?" Elena panted, her heels clicking on the metal grates. "We're trapping ourselves." "The building has an external maintenance lift for the window washers," Arthur shouted. "It runs down the west side. It's manual. They can't cut the power to it from the security desk." They burst onto the roof. The wind was ferocious up here, whipping Elena's hair across her face. The city spread out below them, a grid of grey and glass. The sirens from the street were faint from this height, but the sound of heavy boots banging open the roof door behind them was very loud. "There!" Arthur pointed to the yellow scaffolding rig on the edge of the parapet. "Stop!" a voice boomed. 3 security guards, the tactical team, armored and armed with tasers and batons, burst onto the roof. "Arthur Vance!" the lead guard shouted. "Get on the ground!" Arthur ignored them. He practically threw Eleanor into the metal basket of the window washing rig. He jumped in after her. He slammed the gate shut and hit the release lever. The rig jerked. With a stomach-churning drop, they fell 10 feet before the cables caught. "Zsht!" A taser prong sparked against the metal railing right where Arthur's hand had been a second before. "Going down," Arthur gritted out. He held the manual brake lever. The basket descended. They slid down the side of the glass tower. Arthur looked through the glass as they passed the 49th floor, the 48th. He saw employees staring out, mouths open, watching their former CEO and the heiress descend in a window washing basket. Above them, the guards were shouting into their radios. "They'll meet us at the bottom," Elena said, looking down. The ground was a long, long way down. "They'll surround the landing zone." "We aren't going to the bottom," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the building facade. "We're getting off at the garage level, deck 4. There's a sky bridge to the adjacent parking structure." The descent was terrifying. The wind battered the cage, swinging it away from the building and then slamming it back against the glass. Thud, thud. Arthur shielded Elena with his body, taking the impact against his shoulder. "Deck 4, Arthur counted. "Get ready to jump." The rig whirred past the office floors and reached the concrete levels of the parking garage. The sky bridge was about 5 feet to their left. It was a walkway connecting the Sterling Tower to the public parking garage next door. Arthur jammed the brake. The basket halted with a screech. "We have to swing it," Arthur said. "On 3, lean with me." "Are you crazy?" Elena screamed. 1, 2, 3. They threw their weight against the side of the cage. The basket swung out over the alleyway, a 100-foot drop to the pavement, and then swung back toward the concrete railing of the sky bridge. "Jump!" Arthur roared. Elena vaulted over the railing of the basket. She landed hard on the concrete of the sky bridge, rolling to safety. Arthur followed, his coat flapping, landing clumsily on his hip, but scrambling to his feet instantly. Behind them, the basket swung empty in the wind. "Move!" Arthur grabbed her arm. They ran across the sky bridge into the public parking garage. It was dark, smelling of oil and exhaust. "My car isn't here," Elena said. "We don't need a car. Cars get stuck in traffic. We need the subway." Arthur led her toward the stairwell of the public garage. "The subway station entrance is in the basement of this garage. We blend into the crowd." They ran down 4 flights of stairs. Arthur's lungs were burning. His old life of luxury hadn't prepared him for this, but his life on the streets had given him endurance. He ignored the pain. They burst out into the subway concourse. It was rush hour, a sea of people. Arthur pulled the collar of his suit jacket up. He ruffled his hair, trying to look less perfect. "Keep your head down. Walk fast, but don't run." They merged into the flow of commuters. Arthur felt the vibration of a train arriving. "Where are we going?" Eleanor whispered, clutching the folder to her chest. "To the one person who can legalize this before they kill us," Arthur said. "We're going to the courthouse, to Judge Harrison. He's the one who signed my asset seizure order. He's an honest man who was lied to. When he sees this—" Arthur tapped the pocket where the drive was. "He will be very, very angry." They swiped through the turnstiles just as 2 security guards from the Sterling Tower burst into the station entrance above them. The guards scanned the crowd. "Arthur!" Elena gasped. "Don't look back," Arthur commanded. The subway doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors hissed shut. As the train pulled away, accelerating into the dark tunnel, Arthur finally slumped against the metal pole. He looked at Elena. She was disheveled, her expensive coat torn at the sleeve, her face smudged with grease from the window rig. But she was smiling. A wild, adrenaline-fueled smile. She held up the folder. "We got it." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the black drive. He held it tight. It was cold and hard. It was the weight of his life, finally back in his hands. "We have the weapon," Arthur said, staring into the black reflection of the subway window. "Now, we start the war." The train rattled through the darkness, carrying them toward the light of justice. But Arthur knew the hardest part wasn't the theft. It was the exposure. Robert Sterling wouldn't go down without a fight, and he had lawyers, judges, and the media in his pocket. Arthur looked at his reflection. He wasn't the homeless man anymore. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was something new, something dangerous. "Next stop, Civic Center," the conductor announced. "Next stop, Redemption," Arthur whispered. The chambers of Judge Harrison were lined with books that smelled of dust and authority. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the subway. Arthur sat on a wooden chair, his hands clasped on his knees to stop them from shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Elena paced the room, her coat ruined, her face pale. Across the heavy oak desk sat Judge Harrison, a man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every variety of human deceit. He held the black hard drive in one hand and the leather folder in the other. He looked at Arthur, not with pity, but with a sharp, piercing scrutiny. "You are asking me," the judge said, his voice a low rumble, "to overturn the most high-profile fraud conviction in this city's history, based on a break-in, a stolen hard drive, and the word of a man officially listed as indigent." "I am asking you to look at the metadata, Your Honor," Arthur said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I am asking you to look at the timestamps on those transfer files. They predate my resignation by 48 hours. The funds were moved to an offshore shell company registered to Marcus Sterling before I even stepped into the boardroom that day. The signature on the confession. Look at the vector analysis I pulled up on the screen. It's a clone, a digital copy-paste from a 2015 annual report." The judge looked at the computer monitor, where the decrypted files from the vault were displayed. The evidence was technical, dry and absolutely damning. It showed a systematic looting of the company, orchestrated by the Sterling brothers, with Arthur Vance framed as the fall guy. "If this is true," the judge said, leaning back, the leather of his chair creaking, "then Robert Sterling isn't just a thief, he is a monster, and I was the weapon he used to execute you." "He used the law as a sword," Arthur said softly. "I don't blame the sword, Judge. I blame the hand that wielded it. But now you have the chance to be the shield." The judge was silent for a long moment. He looked at Elena. "And you, Miss Sterling? You are ready to burn your own house down?" Elena stopped pacing. She looked at Arthur. She thought of the cold rain, the cardboard bed, and the kindness of a man who had nothing. "It's not a house, Your Honor," she said firmly. "It's a crime scene. Burn it." The judge picked up his phone. He didn't dial the police. He dialed the federal prosecutor's office. "Get a team to the Sterling Tower," he said into the receiver, "and freeze every asset connected to the Sterling family trust. Immediately. No, I don't care that it's 5 p.m. Wake them up." The takedown did not happen in the shadows. It happened under the glare of 1,000 flashbulbs. 2 days later, Robert Sterling stood at a podium in the grand lobby of the Sterling Tower. He had called a press conference to address the violent home invasion by a disgruntled, mentally unstable former employee. He was dressed in his finest suit, looking every inch the aggrieved captain of industry. The press corps was packed tight, microphones thrust forward like spears. "Arthur Vance was a tragedy," Robert intoned, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "We tried to help him years ago. But his recent actions, attacking my niece, stealing proprietary data, show that he is beyond help. We are cooperating with the police to bring this dangerous fugitive to justice." "Is that so?" The voice boomed from the back of the lobby. It wasn't shouted, but it carried a resonance that cut through the murmur of the crowd. The reporters turned. Cameras swiveled. Arthur Vance stood at the entrance. He was clean-shaven, wearing a new suit provided by the state's Witness Protection Fund. He stood tall, the ghostly stoop of the homeless man gone forever. Beside him stood Elena Sterling, head held high, and flanking them were 6 federal agents in windbreakers marked FBI. Robert Sterling froze mid-sentence, his face drained of color, turning the shade of old parchment. "Arthur," he whispered, the microphone picking up the tremble in his voice. Arthur walked through the crowd. The reporters parted like the Red Sea. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked only at Robert. He walked up the steps to the podium. "You said I was a fugitive, Robert," Arthur said, stepping up to the microphone. Robert stumbled back, terrified. "But I think you have the roles reversed." Arthur looked out at the sea of faces. He saw the world that had forgotten him. 3 years ago I lost my name," Arthur told the cameras. "I was told I was nothing. I was told I was a criminal. I lived in the alley behind this building, eating the scraps from your trash cans." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "But the truth has a way of surviving the cold. The Sterling Empire was built on a lie. And today, the lie ends." He stepped aside. An FBI agent stepped forward, holding a pair of handcuffs. "Robert Sterling," the agent announced, "you are under arrest for grand larceny, securities fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." The room erupted. The flashes were blinding. Robert tried to run, a pathetic attempt to dart toward the private elevators, but the agents were on him in seconds. As they marched him out, handcuffed, he looked back at Arthur with eyes full of hate. "You're nothing!" Robert screamed as they dragged him away. "You're a street rat." Arthur didn't flinch, he just watched him go. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Elena. She was crying, but she was smiling. "It's over," she whispered. Arthur looked at the lobby. The marble he had chosen, the art he had bought. It was just a building, it wasn't his soul. "Yes," Arthur said, a profound weight lifting from his shoulders. "It is finally over." The restoration took months of legal wrangling, but the outcome was inevitable. The evidence from the vault was irrefutable. The courts moved with surprising speed, eager to correct the embarrassment of their previous error. 6 months later, Arthur sat in a conference room at the top of the tower. The gaudy portrait of Marcus was gone, replaced by the simple abstract painting Arthur had recovered from storage. The heavy oak desk was firewood, replaced by a sleek modern glass table. A lawyer slid a stack of documents across the glass. "These are the final reinstatement papers, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said. "Once you sign this, your personal accounts are unfrozen. The company shares are returned to your name. You are the majority shareholder and chairman of the board. You are once again a billionaire." Arthur picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. He looked at the nib. He remembered the last time he had held a pen like this, trembling under coercion. He remembered the nights his hands were too cold to hold a cup of coffee. He looked at Elena, who was sitting across from him. She was no longer the heiress in the silver dress. She was wearing a simple business suit. She had enrolled in law school. She wanted to fight for the people the system forgot. "Are you ready?" she asked. Arthur looked at the paper. Arthur Vance. He signed his name. The ink flowed smooth and dark. It wasn't just a signature. It was a reclamation. "Done," Arthur said, capping the pen. The lawyer smiled. "Congratulations, sir. Welcome back to the world of the living." Arthur stood up. He walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the city in hues of gold and violet. It was the same city that had been a grey prison, but now it glowed. He saw the streets below. He saw the tiny dots of people. "I'm not staying," Arthur said quietly. The lawyer looked confused. "Sir, I'm not staying in this office." Arthur turned around. "I'm appointing a new CEO. I will remain chairman, but my work is not in this tower anymore." "Where will you go?" Eleanor asked, though she seemed to already know. "There are too many people in the rain, Eleanor," Arthur said. "I know their names now. I know where they sleep. I have a fortune, and I intend to spend it making sure no one else has to survive on a cardboard box in my city." Eleanor stood up and walked over to him. She took his hand, the hand that had signed the paper, the hand that had pulled her from the storm. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "I have a lot to learn." Arthur smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. "You have already learned the most important thing, my dear. You learned to see the invisible." The final shot was not in a boardroom. It was on the street level. It was evening. The air was crisp, hinting at autumn. The city lights were just flickering on. Arthur and Eleanor walked out of the front doors of the tower, ignoring the doorman who rushed to hail a limousine. They walked onto the sidewalk. Arthur wore his coat, a new one, warm and tailored, but he wore it open. He took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of roasted nuts and exhaust, but to him it smelled of freedom. They walked past the alleyway where they had met. It was empty now. Arthur paused for a moment, looking at the recessed doorway. He remembered the cold. He remembered the despair. But mostly, he remembered the moment a stranger had asked him for help, and in doing so, had given him a reason to live. "Ready?" Arthur asked, offering his arm. Elena took it. "Ready." They walked forward into the crowd, two silhouettes against the glittering backdrop of the metropolis. They were no longer the broken king and the lost princess. They were partners. They were survivors. And as they disappeared into the rhythm of the city, the camera panned up, past the skyscrapers, past the neon signs, to the night sky where the clouds had finally parted, revealing a tapestry of stars that had been there all along, waiting for the rain to stop.